So today I want to have a conversation with you. I want to hear more about your life, how you ended up becoming what you have become.
I was offered the chance to work in the space industry. If you're characterizing my work life, then what we're talking about is I love the uncertainty of things. You need to take on the mindset of a champion. You need to want to be something different.
Be careful of your thoughts. They become your words. Be careful of your words. They become actions.
In those days, I detested public speaking. I would do almost anything to avoid it.
Detested public speaking.
I did.
And you are a TED Talk speaker and a public speak champion.
So if you fail and you've given it your maximum effort and you've achieved it, then that's just part of life's roller coaster. But if you failed and you haven't put in the effort and you've stopped early, that's your failure. That's nothing to do with life. That's because you haven't given it maximum effort. I always recommend, if people want to learn about a new subject, the best thing to do is buy a children's book on the subject.
Buy children's book.
Buy a children's book on the subject.
Okay, so thank you very much, Bob. Welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, Naveed. Good to be here as always, of course.
As always, yes, thank you very much. So today I want to have a conversation with you. I want to hear more about your life, how you ended up becoming what you have become.
Yeah.
And we want to take some inspiration from how the environment and the people or the mentors played a role in you, in your career, throughout.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about some of the areas of where your life, how do you manage your life later on as well. So we'll start with your journey. So tell us a little bit about your earlier childhood and take us through the journey, how the environment looked like.
Yeah, sure. So I guess it's probably a strange one, because you're thinking of how the influence of parents are on the children. Probably the biggest influence on my childhood was my father's job, which was in the army.
Okay.
And so he used to have to travel a lot. And I travelled with him when I was in primary school. So up to about 10, I used to travel with them and go to there were always schools on the camp. We always went to those schools, on a military base somewhere, often in Germany. He did a lot in Germany. And then there was talk of them having to go to Hong Kong and change about. So at that age, they decided that it would be best for my education if I went to boarding school.
Okay.
Because then I would have a consistent schooling all my life. I'm not sure that really did me any favours. I'm not, I think they did it with the best intentions, as parents always do, to give you a stable platform to build on. But I can't say that it did me any great favours. And I think probably most people will tell you I'm quite an insular person and self-dependent. And I think a lot of that came from boarding school, because you go to boarding school and you have to stand on your own 2 feet. You do have friends, but I didn't actually make any deep friendships there. None. I wouldn't be in touch with any of my school friends now. And I think it just gave me that self-reliance. So there were pluses and minuses to it. When I came out of the end of boarding school, I was very self-reliant. I was self-confident in what I wanted to do and get on with it. But I wasn't very good at forming deep relationships. And of course, later in life, I came to realize that relationships with people are a very powerful bonus to your life, because you get people who can give you a view from the outside of your world, and you don't always see it. When you're in your own world, you only see things your way. And it's really good if you've got friends who can give you that external view. And I was by and large missing that, so I did everything myself. The one thing it didn't do was give me a terribly good education, which was meant to be the whole purpose of me going there, because many of your listeners will not relate to my education, but in those days we didn't have GCSEs, which I think is what they have now. We had O-levels and A-levels. Well, I only had 3 O-levels when I left school, and each of those was on a separate certificate, which means I did them one at a time.
Okay.
So I did maths early because I just had a natural affinity with maths. Maths was a real strong point for me. And so I did that a year early, and that was all right. And then I struggled through English language at the normal time and failed English literature, and I got English literature on the retake the following year. So I only had 3. And so I left school with sort of poor prospects in a sense, because I didn't have the academic strength. I didn't go on to A levels because I didn't have the O levels to get me into the sixth form. I clearly wasn't going to go to university. And so I went out into the world not knowing really what to expect. So when I left school, I had quite an interesting time. In fact, I always relate it as one of the best jobs I had in my life. As I was leaving school, my dad was leaving the army. And so he was travelling with my mum. At the time, he was based in Catterick Camp. And he was leaving the army. And so they were touring around looking where they wanted to settle and where they thought they might get a job and all the rest, all the things that go. So it wasn't a terribly convenient time to have a young person around. So my uncle, who was a forester on a lord's estate, offered to give me board and lodging in return for work. So I went to work in a lord's. He was the head forester for a lord's estate.
Okay.
So I went to work in the forest as a woodman.
Okay.
Which was thrilling. Now, in those days, to give you some idea, when I first joined him, he sent me out in the woods to what was called sprag some trees, which was take the branches off, with a £10 felling axe and a chainsaw. Now, these days, health and safety would say something very different. You'd have to go through quite a few courses before that could happen, but those weren't the days. And I just absolutely loved it. You know, I was in the woods, chopping down trees, spragging them, all the jobs that went with it. And it was tremendous fun to me. It wasn't really work. And then when I finished with that, my father, who then had secured a job with ATV in Boreham Wood, as it was then. And so they'd settled in Hemel Hempstead, and they said, all right, you know, time to come home now. So I went home, and things were very relaxed, and I was quite enjoying. And my dad sort of said to me, well, do you not think it's about time you thought about getting a job? A subtle hint. And in those days, we had something called the Youth Employment Office, which was where young people went when they wanted a job. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I went down to see the Youth Employment Officer. And he said, so what sort of thing did you enjoy when you were at school? I didn't give him the true answer, which was very little. But the things I did enjoy were when we were doing geography, drawing out maps and things like that, and obviously my maths. And so he said, well, I think you could do as a draftsman in an engineering company. So and engineering was never on the horizon for me. I think it's a point that I would make to all young people. You know, it's very hard at the age of 16 to be deciding what you want to do for the rest of your life. And I think it's almost impossible. In my day, I think there was slightly more pressure in that it was expected that if you went into a career, you were likely to stay in that career for the whole of your life. But nowadays, people are expected to have 3, perhaps 4 careers. And so it's not quite as critical to get it right the first time. But just have a look at what you enjoy and go and find a job that uses what you enjoy and see if you enjoy it as work. And then if you do enjoy it as work, then, you know, you're set. And that happened to me. But before then, of course, I had to get an actual job. And the man said, well, I have 2 jobs open for a draftsman. He said, one is in Hemel Hempstead and one is in Berkhamsted. He said, I'll send you to Hemel tomorrow morning and you can go to Berkhamsted in the afternoon. So I'm not sure I should recommend this to your young listeners. So I went to the first interview and the man said, do you know what the draftsmen do? And I said, no. I said, I have no idea. He said, we pick the shape and they draw the shape for the concrete. And then the engineers design the steel that goes inside. The steel gets bent to that shape. They build this shape out of wood on the site, put the steel inside it and pour the concrete. And I said, oh, terrific, very interesting. I didn't get that job. And then in the afternoon, I went to the interview in Berkhamsted, and the chap said to me, do you know what we do here? I said, well, I think the draftsmen draw the shape that you want, and then the engineers design the steel and build the shape out of wood and put the steel inside and pour the concrete. And he said, oh, you know quite a lot about it. And I said, oh, yes. I said, I've been reading up about it. And he said, well, we'll give you the job then. So sometimes you have to make your own luck, I think, in life. And so at that stage, really, it was just a job to me. I went into it. But of course, with the maths and everything, once I got into it, then I really started to enjoy it.
So a couple of points up to the things that you've just mentioned. So because of your father being in the army, where you're required to move cities, right? So you're going to other countries.
Yeah.
And at that time, they had to initially carry you with them. That meant you were disrupted in your sequence of studies.
Yeah.
All the time. So they decided to put you in a boarding school.
Yeah.
With the view that you'll have some continuity.
Yeah.
While that gave you some self-reliance and self-discipline and the ability to manage your own self, which is a big thing right now. If you look at the youth now, they cannot.
No.
There's a big problem.
Well, some can.
So on one side, that's good that you managed to learn how to manage yourself. But then because of the initial disruption in your continuity because of the travel, and then this boarding school, you struggle to find that deep relationship, those close friendships that you develop, these lifelong friends, right?
Yeah.
And that has its own merits. If I reflect on my life, I have very close friendship with my school friends.
Yeah.
Even though my father was also in the airlines, so we would be we had the main base as Islamabad, Pakistan, but then we would it's called posting. So in posting, we went to Gilgit, we went to England, we went to UAE.
Yeah, sure.
So some places we went together as a family, some place only dad went.
Yeah.
We stayed. But when we went to Gilgit, which is the northern part of Pakistan, we knew nobody.
Yeah.
It's a mountainous region. They have their own culture. It's a completely different place.
Yeah.
And father was the airport manager. And so he's like the head of any flight that comes to Gilgit, any dignitary, anybody. So we'll have friendships with the deputy commissioners and all these big shots who come to that area, even the president. So we got the exposure to that. Friendships, again, because we were only there for 2 years. We were forming friendships while it was happening, and suddenly we moved back.
Yeah.
So I can relate with what you experienced, like we couldn't form that friendship. But I was fortunate that I came back to the same school where I had the nursery and the first few years.
Okay.
Went away for 2 years, then came back to the same one. So up to O levels.
Yeah.
In Pakistan, it's called matriculation.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So I had almost the same friends.
Yeah.
Right? And many were acquaintances and many were friends, but we are very, I think, very emotionally connected. We have a WhatsApp group, we meet regularly wherever, whoever is visiting, and any few friends can get together, we do. We even had partnerships with different businesses from those school-related relationships.
Yeah.
And then came the university, right? So that's the second group of friends. And we'll come to yours as well.
Yeah, sure.
But I feel that when you forge those kind of friendships early in those schooling days, they are lifelong friendships because there's no other hidden agenda. There's not necessarily a competition.
No.
Yeah, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
We have no profession, no earning, no comparison, right? We're just there. Yes, we're trying to study. We want to have good grades. There might be some competition in studies, but that's ignorable, right?
Yeah.
In professional life, friendships change, they evolve. Yes, in the university days, you have lots of fun together, but then as you go into the professional life, comparisons start.
Yeah.
And the competition starts. Okay, so he's going there, he's earning that much, or he's doing this much, or he's having such visibility, others are just doing this hidden work, all sorts of different visibility levels this fame level, the wealth level, all sorts of things. So we'll come to that from your perspective as well. Up to this point, this is great to hear that we can relate to your story of how you were enjoying some things while learning or trying to find what you really wanted to do.
Yeah.
Your view on you were good at maths, but you struggled in English, even though you're an expert professional public speaker.
Yeah,
What's now, right?
I can tell you what, if I was, I know it's not possible because some of them won't be around now, but I think if I were to go back and tell my English teachers that I was a communication expert, they'd die laughing. Mind you, I ended up with 2 degrees. If I'd told them then that I was going off to do 2 degrees, they'd have also died laughing.
Yes, and I was quite surprised that you mentioned that you only had 3 GCSEs and you were struggling and you were like, you had no view of going to the uni,
No.
and let alone even forget about the engineering degree, right?
Yeah.
And here you are, a accomplished engineer, a very complex one, a rocket scientist kind of person, and then also a communication expert. So it's great to see the passion.
I would think, again, a strong tip for young people is to keep moving until you find your passion. Because for me, passion drove everything. When I was at school, I wasn't a good student. I think I had ADHD before it was invented. And I just had that sort of butterfly mind, you know, and I still have it. When I'm studying, when I'm working on things, other thoughts spark off in my head as I'm going. I have this creative bent, and I think that helped me in the speaking when it came to creating speeches, that things fly off in my head. Now, if I've got to do something and I've got to be disciplined, I've learnt now that when these things fly off in my head, I've got a logbook. You know, all engineers carry a logbook,
Yes.
and I can see you've got yours with you.
Yes.
And when these thoughts fly off, I have to make a note of them and come back to them later. But in those days, I didn't have the discipline for it, so I would be attracted by new thoughts that had entered my head, and it made it very disruptive for me to learn. The sort of standard school format of sitting there going through stuff didn't really work that well for me, and I wasn't interested, or I couldn't see much of a point. So basically, I had a good time for 6 years at school, but didn't learn that much. So
So you're saying in these early ages, around 16 years, where people are required to decide on where they want to go,
yeah,
reaching up to that point, if they carry a book or a place where they can park their creative ideas, keep adding them there, and then keep trying different things, learning different things, experiencing different areas.
yeah, I think there's a great deal to be said for being temporary labour. You know, temporary labour is not a job. They're giving you the job because they need a hand at the moment, but you don't have a job and you don't have any security. Of course, I worked 40 years of my life as an engineer on contract as a freelancer without any security, and it's absolutely great.
40 years.
40 years, yeah. At 20 years, I worked on a 3-month contract. But the point is that if you go in as temporary labour, you'll find people are always looking. It gives you a chance to look in a company and see what they're like and see whether the work they do you think might interest you, or try your hand at things. And it gives you an insight into what it's like to be at work, what you have to do, and what's available. I was just fortunate, I think, because I was pushed into that road by the job, you know, by the Youth Employment Office. And when I got in, I found I loved it. And that was, you're the man who loves to talk about purpose, but that developed my purpose. And I think until you find your purpose, you're a bit like an aimless soul wandering about. And that definition that you get out of a sense of purpose pushes you on. So the interesting thing is that I think when I came out of my engineering degree, I would have been regarded as a top student.
Really?
Yes.
So from that struggling school,
from struggling at
Yeah.
school. So when I went, do you want to hear the next phase?
just please.
Right. So I got this job, having blagged my way through the interview, and they had something called day release for education,
Day release.
which meant as an apprentice, I had to sign up to an apprenticeship,
Mhm.
and they sent you to college to do ONC construction. It was in those days, which was 1 day a week. I had to give one evening myself and go on a separate evening. And then we had, so I worked 4 days at work. I had 1 day off. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. I was being paid.
Mhm.
I was learning.
Mhm.
When I came back in the office, the engineers in the office were interested in what I'd learned, and they would then discuss it with me. So I was learning at a far higher level. My interest was being stimulated all the time. And it was absolutely wonderful. And still at that stage, I had no thoughts of going to university, because the way that company worked was you did ONC, which was ordinary level national certificate, then HNC, which was the higher level,
Mhm.
and then you did a few endorsements and you became a chartered engineer.
Okay.
And my map was laid out then. I could see where I was going, and that was all great. And then suddenly the engineering institutes announced that they would stop taking that route and only take graduate engineers.
Oh wow.
So I thought about it, and in fact, I said when I came out of university, I'd have been regarded as a top student, but on my ONC,
Mhm.
my marks were so good that they said with those marks, you'd easily get into university.
Oh wow.
And I'd never thought of that. But again, I went off. I didn't actually go to university. I went to a polytechnic, Hatfield Polytechnic it was in those days. It's now the much posher Hertfordshire University. But
Okay.
Hatfield Polytechnic was a great technical organisation, because it was built right next to British Aerospace.
Oh yes, yes. Many airplanes were invented there, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So what used to happen was that all the apprentices and engineers from British Aerospace were sent to Hatfield Polytechnic. So it had this incredibly strong engineering department. So I benefited from that. And in fact, the bloke who taught me structures was an engineer who'd come out of British Aerospace and had taken up lecturing.
Wow.
So I had good marks at my ONC. So clearly the challenge with my education was finding the right subject that interested me, that made me want to sit and learn. And during that period, because I only had 3 O levels and you were meant to have 4, I persuaded them to let me in if I did the force at night classes.
Oh really? Wow.
And I did the physics at night class. And again, I got a good grade in that on the way
So
through.
by that time, you would have developed that energy, that positive energy. It's like, okay, I can do this. I am able to do this, and I'm putting the effort in, and I'm in the right environment and the right. We'll go into the mentorship as well, because those top professionals or very experienced engineers, you were in their company.
Yeah.
Just being in their company would mean a lot, right? There's a huge difference.
I think rather than mentors, because I can't think at that age that I had many mentors in my life, but I certainly had people of influence, people I would regard as role models,
Okay.
people that I looked at and thought, yeah, that's what I would like to do.
Okay.
So, I mean, the structures lecturer that I talked about at Hatfield Poly, he was one. I could see how well he did the structures. And in fact, although my degree was in civil engineering, I did all the structures options. So I came out and then I did a postgraduate diploma on structural engineering. So,
So that role model, his passion is his depth of understanding and his
those
passion for that
abilities.
subject.
Yeah, sure.
That inspired you to saying, okay, I want to be that.
Yeah.
And then you followed that route. Even though your degree wasn't there, you actually added add-ons related to that.
Yeah.
You
So I picked
focused-
all the options that suited me rather than civil engineering. Civil engineering was a good laugh. I went out on site for my industrial experience. You know, we were building a sewage works up in Chester.
Okay.
And it was great fun.
So,
But I don't think I'd have liked to have done that for the job. I was interested in the design element of it.
yeah. Okay. So, okay. So now we are at that point where you have become an engineer. You got that degree.
No, yes. So I went through that. When I did my industry experience, I went with a company called Norwest Hulse. Norwest Hulse Specialised Structures, they were. They used to do all the big structures. They used to do things like cooling towers and grain silos, huge stuff. We were on Tomorrow's World. We did something called a parashell at Malvern Girls High School, which was fascinating. And they filmed it all for Tomorrow's World. So I did that industrial experience, and when I finished my degree, you get the milk round where all the employers come to see if you're suited to them, as they offer you a job. And Norwest Hulse was straight in touch and said, we'd like to offer you a job to come straight back here. So I thought, why not?
So because you had started enjoying that
Yeah.
area of expertise or that profession per se, and you were doing it so because you started enjoying it, that's why you were getting good grades?
Yeah.
Or was it vice versa? You're
No.
getting good grades at
No. It's because it had my interest and I felt a sense of purpose that my academic performance was there. Obviously, the academic ability was always there. It just wasn't coming out because the environment wasn't right. You talk about the environment, the importance of the environment. And it can be hard, I think, when you've got children that you have to discipline them to do their homework. But if they're not enjoying it, then it's a chore. But when you enjoy it, it's never a chore.
Yes.
It's just easy to do. You know, I think when I worked for myself, when I left engineering and I worked from home, I worked harder than I did when I worked in engineering. But I never regarded it as work because of what I'm doing. So, yeah.
Wonderful. So you say that the previous generation didn't switch their careers much, but you have evolved and pivoted quite a lot.
I have, for sure. So that was the first pivot to get my engineering degree, and I went to Norwest Hulse. They paid for my postgraduate diploma, which was great, and I did that. I wasn't very long into that job when I started to realise that working like that was not for me.
Okay.
So I enjoyed the work, I enjoyed the analysis work, but I was sat in an office and I was sat at my drawing board because we used to do a lot of detail work and as well as the analysis. And then the engineer who'd been there 10 years was 2 drawing boards in front of me. And the engineer who'd been there 20 years was a drawing board in front of him. And I thought, I cannot see myself working 20 years to move forward 2 drawing boards. So I started to get that sense of lack of challenge, if you like, that I could do the work and I enjoyed the work, but the challenge was starting to erode because I could see that if I stayed there, I would do the same thing. Because I was regarded as a good student at Hatfield Poly, one of the lecturers there in Mekero was approached by a petrochem company in St Albans called John Zinc. I don't think they exist there now. Made burners for the industry, and they wanted a chief structural engineer.
Okay.
So he put me forward, and I went for the interview, and somehow I managed to get the job.
Somehow.
Well, I explained to him that I had no background in that industry. And he asked me some questions. He asked me some question on steel. I said, I have no idea what that steel is. I said, because we don't use it, because this is not my background. Anyway, despite all that, he gave me the job. And I went in as chief structural engineer. But again, I have to say I was working directly with the managing director. I reported into the managing director. But I found working for companies was very poor in my experience because you were reliant on what they did. I have to tell you about my first pay rise because he offered me a good salary, much better than I was earning at Norwest Hulse. And he said, we'll review it after 6 months. And if you're doing a good job, he said, I'll give you a minimum pay rise of £500 a year. It doesn't sound a lot now, but in those days it was quite a big chunk. And I said, all right, fair enough. So I set off and I did the work, and we seemed to get on well, and things went well. And at 6 months, in fact, at 5 months, he called me in and he said, Bob, he said, I've liked all your work. He said, you're doing brilliantly, so I've decided we'll give you a pay rise. So I said, oh, thanks, Alex. That's great, and I got on with my work. And then I got my pay slip and it didn't have the pay rise on it. So I went to the chap who was the financial controller and said, Alex told me I was getting the pay rise. And he said, oh, yes, but he said it's at 6 months, so you won't get it till next month. And I said, but he called me in this month, told me I was getting it. And he said, no, he said, you don't get it until next month. Anyway, next month it arrived and I looked at it and it was £500.
Okay.
So I went into Alex and I said, well, I said, when I started, you said if I did a good job, the minimum pay rise you give me is £500. And I said, what you've given me is the minimum. So why do you think I'm only worth the minimum
Okay.
that you said?
Yeah.
And he gave me, he was a Texan, and you know what they say about Texans? They can,
No, tell me.
hey?
No, I don't know.
I'm not sure it's right for the recording,
Okay.
but they talk a load of baloney, basically.
Okay.
And then he gave me these excuses, this and that and the other. And I thought, this doesn't work for me, working for somebody, because you're just dependent on them for your career. And that was the stage that I decided to go contract. So in my mother's eyes, I did 2 proper jobs, which lasted about 2.5 years. And then I just became freelance. And I absolutely adored being freelance because I went from industry to industry. And when you're freelance, they expect you to hit the ground running. So
Yes.
they don't. In fact, at one place, I worked for some time at Marshall's in Cambridge.
Mm-hmm.
And when you went for an interview in Marshall's, they expected you to turn up with your calculator and your pencil. Because if they liked you, they said, yeah, that's it. There's your desk, get started.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so I went out of petrochem into avionics, into airframes.
Mm-hmm.
Where did I go from airframes? I think I went into dynamics. So I was working on propellers, wind turbines, undercarriages.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just all fantastic to me. But the thing was, although all the engineering formulas sort of basically stay the same, the way people use them is very different. And when I was talking about sitting at my desk in Norwest Holst and seeing that the people who were 20 years ahead of me were only 2 boards ahead of me,
Mm-hmm.
in this environment, it was very different. And I felt the sense in Norwest Holst that there was no sense of challenge. Because you were getting promoted on the fact that you've been there a number of years and you just did a good job. But when you went as a contractor, you sort of arrived day one or for the interview in Marshall's case with your pencil and your calculator, and they sat you down at the desk and said, here's your job, here's a bit of wing, get checking it. And that's it. And you have to start to think how they would want to do it. And I worked on some great products. If you ever watch the Red Arrows,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll see on the underbelly, there is a tank of diesel, which they use to blow into the jet efflux to produce the stream.
Oh, yes.
So I worked on that.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. It surprised my family because we were at Swanage. I think it's one of those things that you take them for granted. You never think about these things.
Mm-hmm.
But we were at Swanage and the Red Arrows were doing the show. So we were all sat on the hillside watching the Red Arrow, and the Red Arrows zoomed over and I said, oh, you see that tank underneath? I said, I worked on that. And he went, what? But I just worked on some fantastic things, but all the time there was an assumption that you could do the job, and they just gave it to you. And I loved that challenge, and I loved the challenge every time I changed industry. So when I went to British Aerospace Dynamics, there were huge things to change. They gave me propellers to look after. I used to have to write the failure reports. I used to do things called concessions, which a lot of people used to hate, but I used to love them. Because all the time people would make manufacturing errors, and then they'd send it in saying, we've got this unit and there's an error in it. How can we correct it? So you then have to go through all the analysis and work out what the problem was and whether it was in a critical area and how you could treat it. And it developed my knowledge, because all these things, they tend to be, so an undercarriage would be plated, and then they'd have to do remedial work, which meant they'd have to take the plating off, but then you'd have to take the plating off in a way that didn't deteriorate the fatigue life of the material.
Yes.
And then you'd have to replate it to get it back to its original condition. So I used to have to go to the Met lab, the metallurgy lab, and talk through them, the processes and all that, and put it all together in this document to send back to say, do this. And it just broadened my engineering scope. And I think out of it, you ended up fearing nothing, really. Because if you got an engineering problem, you realized you were talking about how you learn.
Yes.
You know, how to show people to learn. And I think out of it, I learned that actually, if you took things fairly methodical and looked at the problems and wrote it down, you learnt a huge amount about how each operation affected your piece of hardware. So in the end, you were really experienced with it.
Amazing.
I used to love it. And then I went into air weapons. Yeah, with MBDA. And I particularly worked on ASRAM, which was a Sidewinder replacement, an air-to-air missile. But there were loads of different things, completely different set of problems. You know, because the speed of missiles and the acceleration of them gives you huge problems in the air. And we had a lot of fun in those. I remember on one occasion, we went out to Germany to do a live vibration test on a warhead.
Live vibration test on a warhead.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when you put a warhead on a missile, it's on a wing and it's vibrating.
Yes.
So when the pilot switches it on, it's no good if it explodes on the wing and takes his wing off. So you have to make sure that when it's switched on and it's live, you can vibrate it and it doesn't explode. So we went out somewhere into the middle of the Black Forest and put this thing in a bunker. We didn't stand in the bunker. We watched on the video link and then vibrated this thing. So the work was all just interesting and it was diverse. And you had to take what's basically an engineering set of solutions and find a way to apply them to new problems.
So if I understand this correctly, this was more of, you understood the methodology and the principles behind engineering.
Yeah.
And depending on the context and the type of engineering it was, your inquisitive nature and your creativity help you understand, okay, so this is a problem. Yes, it has happened.
Yeah.
This could be a symptom. Where is the root cause?
Yeah.
And for the root cause, you'll have to go to all different types of engineerings and their approaches.
Yeah.
And that will increase the horizon of your learning.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
that will ultimately be your differentiator as well, because most of the people won't understand. They'll be only siloed in their focused areas.
Yes, exactly.
And you're looking at all around as well,
Yeah.
which makes you well-rounded engineer.
Yeah.
So your passion led you to learn a lot more.
Yes.
in that
Part,
way.
yeah. My passion and the fact that I was never off put by not knowing what to do. In fact,
yes,
parts
that's
of
the
me
point, yes.
absolutely loved the challenge of being dropped into a new industry I'd never worked in and being told to get on with my job, of which I knew nothing really. And that was a huge challenge, but I loved the challenge because it just made me use my attributes to the best,
Okay,
best of my ability.
great. So let's continue the journey of you enjoying your passion, pursuing this engineering mindset and solving those problems that probably were not solved then yet. And you learned how to use that knowledge to be in a place where you're not comfortable with initially.
Yeah.
But you were so confident that, yes, I know the engineering approach. I have been there, done that somewhere in another industry or another context. I'm going to utilize that approach in this new problem, and I'm not worried. I will solve it.
Yeah.
So that confidence comes in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, so you develop that, and what you find is that most industries use the same analytical tools. They just have different rules around them.
Okay.
So your job is really to develop and understand the rules of the new job. So a couple of things happened just in a sort of cycle of work, I guess. I was offered the chance to work in the space industry, and I'd never worked in that. And it's interesting you talk about learning things, because I have a distinct approach to learning things nowadays. I always recommend, if people want to learn about a new subject, the best thing to do is buy a children's book on the subject.
Buy children's book also.
Buy a children's book
So
on the
best
subject.
way to learn about a new subject
Yeah.
or a field is to buy
A
children's book
on the
on
subject.
the subject.
Yeah.
Okay. Never heard that before.
Right. So the reason behind it is that children's books are very simple. The people who write children's books have to make them clear and simple. But what they do is they build a framework for your knowledge. Yeah.
Okay.
So you have a structure which gives you an overview. Children's books are at a very superficial level, but they cover a broad area. So you get a real understanding for where all the bits fit. I've come now to talk about how good communication goes from big picture to small detail. And what children's books do very well is they set the big picture. So when I moved into the space industry, I never had a big interest in space particularly. I was interested in the structural side, the engineering side, but I thought, well, I better understand a little bit about it. So the first thing I bought was a children's encyclopedia of space.
Okay.
And I read that, and it talked about the planets and all the rest of it, all at a very superficial level. But then you get a good understanding of where all the bits are, and anything that you want to develop in detail, you can drive deeper into the bits that interest you.
So you widened the horizon.
Yeah.
So
Big
hearing
picture.
that big picture. So this is the children's encyclopedia would give you such a wide range of things, because it's children, because it will be much easier to understand.
Yeah.
And then from that you choose where you want to go deeper.
Yeah. And then you find books that will take you deeper in that area, but then you have an idea of how it relates to the whole, how it relates to everything else. So in the space industry, I loved it. I did spend some time working on communication satellites, which are not the most interesting structures in the world. And because they do a lot of them, they know them very well. But I also worked on 2 deep space projects, the ExoMars rover and the Mercury Bepi Colombo. So the ExoMars rover, which was the last job I did in the space industry, really interesting, very good. The thing I liked, again, if I suppose perhaps if you're characterizing my work life, then what we're talking about is I love the uncertainty of things. So satellites were certain. We knew how to build satellites. They were slightly different every time we did them, but they were by and large the same, perhaps beefed up if the payload was a bit heavier. But when you're building a deep space craft, firstly, the craft is different because it's specific to the mission. And secondly, you're going somewhere where no one's gone before.
Yes. Yeah.
So you've got a different set of challenges. So they were very challenging work, and I absolutely loved that. I was a bit disappointed with the ExoMars project because we finished that. That was good. That was ready to launch. But it was going on a Russian Proton rocket, and then the war in Ukraine broke out. And of course, we weren't allowed to send it on a Russian Proton rocket. And so it's now waiting. We're hoping it will go in 2028.
Okay.
That they found a launch vehicle for it. But Bepi Colombo is my pride and joy. That's currently going round Mercury, and we're waiting till December next year when it's going to be finally deployed. And that will be the big acid test, when they press the button, whether it all works.
Yes.
So it'll be a moment of nervousness. So I really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the challenge of the space industry. And it was probably the most settled place. I was there 20 years. It was probably the most
20 years.
most settled place I'd been
Okay.
in there. But something happened in parallel with that, which sort of changed my course of life again.
Okay.
There.
Another pivot coming?
Yeah, another pivot coming.
Okay.
Another accidental pivot, of course. Not one that not one that was planned. I don't want anyone to think that my life has been planned, because everything has been an accident, and I've just followed what I've enjoyed.
Yeah.
And this is just the way it's worked out for me. But I did my MBA with the Open University, because in those days, being a contractor, of course, if I stopped work, I didn't get paid. So there was no chance of me going to do a full-time MBA. But the Open University would let me do it at home on videos and audio tapes in those days. It was about one of the very few places you could get good quality online learning.
Really? Okay.
And then in those days, I detested public speaking. I would do almost anything to avoid it.
Detested public speaking.
I did.
And you are a TED Talk speaker and a public speak champion.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, if there's a moral in there, it's that you don't know how good you are at anything till you try it yourself. And of course, I spent my life avoiding it and doing pretty well at it, I have to say. I could duck most things. And then with the MBA, you had to go on these summer schools, which is where you just went and all did some projects together. And on this particular project, there was a project to do and a presentation to do at the end of it. And there were 5 of us in the group, and one woman, she was in sales, and she said, I do presentations all the time. She said, I'll do the presentation. And the other 4 of us took a step back and said, it's all yours.
Thank you very much.
Exactly. So she did the presentation, and it was great. She did a good job. And the lecturer got up on the stage. He said, you've done well on your project works good. He said the presentation was good, and he turned to the 4 of us who were sat at the side and said, why are you 4 sat like you're in the doctor's waiting room? Why weren't you taking part in the presentation? And we all sort of mumbled some vague excuse under our breath. And he said words that changed my life. And you said about mentors, and I said there haven't been many mentors as such, but there have been people of influence. And he was definitely a person of influence. He said to us then, he said, I'll tell you this now, your career will go nowhere unless you learn to speak in public.
Wow.
And I tried to think of reasons why that could be untrue, but in the end, I couldn't come up with any. Because it was obvious, if you looked in the workplace, the people who were at the top were able to communicate effectively. And there were some people who were at the top who could communicate effectively. I didn't think were very talented in the world of engineering, but they were still at the top.
Yep.
And so I thought, I need to do something about this. And then you will know that you've been a member of Hertfordshire Speakers, and I started Hertfordshire Speakers with Viv Starkis. And that all came about by accident, because Viv and I were friends. He was the membership vice president, I think, for the Chamber of Commerce.
Okay.
And he was the person who got me into the Chamber of Commerce, and he and I were friends, and we used to meet up. And I invited him to dinner. Sally was away. She was doing something. She was away. And I said, Viv, why don't you come round for dinner and I'll cook spaghetti bolognese? He said, that's great. And then he rang me up and he said, oh, look, he said, I can't make dinner. He said, because I've got to go to this public speaking organisation, Toastmasters. And he said, I promised this bloke and I've turned him down twice. He said, I can't do it again. So I thought, well, I ought to go and see what this is about. So I said to him, why don't you come early? We'll have an early dinner and then we'll go together. So he said, great idea. So we had dinner and we went off to Hertfordshire Speakers. And it was run by an inimitable chap called Frank Furness, who a lot of people know now, a great international speaker, Frank. And he ran it. Before I knew what had happened, I was signed up to join this club. And I started off, and my apprehension at speaking was just the same. I detested it, but very rapidly it started to evaporate. And I was doing different things. We were in the Red Cross because I was a football coach for my son's football teams. So I had an FA coaching badge, and I did the football coaching. And I felt you did your first aid course, and it was 3 years between courses. Your course was valid for 3 years. Then you had to do a refresher. And I thought, that's bonkers. You know, I could be 2.5 years without doing anything, and then I have a major incident and I've got to try and remember what I did 2.5 years. So we joined the Red Cross so that we were constantly refreshing it, so that I was always on top of it. If there was an accident in football, then I was prepared to deal with it. And that actually, on one occasion, stood me in very good stead. But then, because we were enthusiastic about it, we became trainers. So I was doing Toastmasters. We did that for a year, and then we started our own club. And then I belonged to 2 clubs. Then I was doing the Red Cross training, and all of a sudden I was speaking on a regular basis, and it ceased to worry me. It just vanished. It evaporated. And once that apprehension evaporated, I then started to focus on the communication skills. So I was thinking about the training, and it was Frank who encouraged me in the first place to enter the competitions. And I entered the competitions. I didn't do very well. I didn't win. But somehow it fired my enthusiasm, because, again, it was a different level of challenge. Instead of just going along and doing the speech in front of the club and having everyone say, oh, yes, you know, you've done very well, that's good. Competition was a real challenge. And if you weren't successful, you ended up being dumped out of the competition. And it became a real catalyst for me. And so I entered those competitions, and I gradually started to do well. And I think there's an interesting lesson in there, because when I'm introduced, you talked about when I said I detested public speaking, first thing you said, and here you are, you know, you're a championship winning public speaker. And whenever you're introduced, that's what people say. They say you're a championship winning speaker. No one talks about all the times you've failed.
Yes. Yeah.
And we have 4 levels of competition in Toastmasters. So you have to win the club, the area, the division, and the district, which is the whole, in those days, was the whole of the UK and Ireland.
Oh, okay.
And nobody talks about the 5 years I lost at division before I got to my first district final.
Yes.
And you just keep going back. You know, I had 2 years where I was unplaced, and then I got a third, and then I got a second, and then I got my first place finally, and moved forward into the district final. And I was completely unprepared. I never thought this thing through, really. I thought that when I got to the district final, history would repeat itself, and I probably wouldn't do very well because I was up against good competition. And I would have to take a few years to be at that level before I won the district. But I didn't. I won it first time through. And then before I knew it, I was on a plane to America to public speaking finals without having a clue why I'd done well and how to do it again. So all these things are great learning lessons, you know, and competition inspired me, and it pushes you to learn far harder than almost anything. But as a result of that, by the time I'd been 5 years in the space industry, it started to dawn on me, as I was polishing my communication skills, and public speaking in particular, but other communication skills, that I was surrounded by really bright people. I mean, probably, I don't know, but at a guess, probably 40% PhDs on the engineering floor.
Oh, okay.
Really bright people around who couldn't communicate. And the messages would just get lost.
I've been there. I can relate so much with that.
Absolutely.
Especially engineers who know so much about things.
Yeah.
They know so much detail, and they think like that's the thing that really is in the interesting part.
Yeah.
And they focus so much onto this nth level of detail, and they forget that the other person has no clue and no interest in talking about this, because they want to know the big picture and then only the related point on why.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And that's called the curse of knowledge.
Curse of knowledge, yes.
The curse of knowledge is that people who are very talented and very experienced in an area cannot imagine what it's like to look at a problem without the benefit of their knowledge and experience.
Yes.
And that's absolutely right. That's how it was in those days. I was surrounded by it. And I can remember when I realized that Toastmasters was making a difference in my life, because we did a lot of programs for the European Space Agency. And I went to these meetings, and we perhaps have 14 people around the table. Some of them from what in those days I think was Astrium. It's now Airbus Defence and Space, but in those days it was Astrium. So we'd have the people from Astrium, we'd have people from European Space Agency. And on one occasion, they were all debating something, and the debate was going backwards and forwards, and they couldn't agree. And from the back of the room, I said, "You're never going to agree." I said, "The challenge is none of you have any knowledge of how this is going to perform in a vacuum." And the whole room stopped and turned and looked at me. And then I could see the dawn of recognition come on. And I realized at that point that what I'd been able to do was articulate the problem very clearly for them so they could all see it, but simply without diving into the detail, which is what they were all doing. And from then on, really, I started to notice that people listened to me. It was, I had a friend who used to take the mickey out of me in a very good-natured way. But he used to say, "How is it when you go to a meeting and you talk that people listen? And when I talk, they carry on talking." But a part of it was true. And I realized that I was developing this skill to be able to put my message over simply and clearly. And it manifested itself in people used to come and ask me for advice. What should I do with this? What should I do with that? And I would look at their problem and give them a solution, and off they go. And on one occasion, a chap asked me, he came over and he said, "Oh, could I ask you what I should do with this?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I'll gladly help you." I said, "But why are you asking me?" I said, "You don't work for me. You work for so-and-so." He said, "Yeah." But he said, "When I come to speak to you, I get an answer I can go away and use." And that was clearly a difference. There were people in senior positions there who still could not deliver what people needed when they came with a problem.
I've seen that all along my career as well.
Yeah.
So being a technology professional myself, as computer scientist, having that kind of senior who can communicate with me simply,
Yeah.
without going into the nth level of detail, without even expecting that I would know everything.
Yeah, sure.
That has been a blessing in the career path, because there are others who know so much, this curse of knowledge issue, but because of their lack of understanding of this communication or simplification of communication, they ignore that part. So they don't give the context, they don't give you the big picture, they try to go into the detail where other person is not there yet. So helping others, empathizing with them, saying, okay, where are they? And what is the minimalist, simplest message I can give them that they can benefit from or they can use to
So
take the next steps.
that's the key. They misunderstand the problem. They think when people come to them, they either want an answer, a numerical answer, or they want information, whereas really what they want is direction. They want a sense of clarity and direction. And if you can't give them the clarity and direction, they go away with more information, but just as confused as they were when they first came.
Clarity and direction. You use this term quite a lot. I don't know exactly what it is. It's about the fire hose, not fire hose, the container and the spilling kind of analogy that you use. Do you recall that?
No.
You used it a couple of times. It's the, in the old days, there were fire buckets. So something to do with drinking from that, and you actually ultimately throw up. So
you can't drink from a fire hose.
Yeah, something along those lines. That analogy related so much with me. It's like, okay, because ultimately you are going to throw up.
Well, it's too much. It's just too much quantity. And what they're doing is they're answering the question based on their knowledge, not your knowledge. And so it's a very different proposition. And so I had a talk years ago. I haven't used it for some time, largely because people used to get the title wrong. I called it A Giant Step for Man, a Small Step for Mankind. And what people used to do was correct it and put in a small step for man, a giant step for mankind, which of course was Neil Armstrong's quote. But what it was about the move from engineers who go into line managers. So in the scheme of the world, it's a very small change, a small step for mankind, but it's a giant step for man because it's a complete mentality shift to go from an engineer, a senior engineer, into a line manager's role. And it requires a very different attitude and change of mind. So it's a huge step. And people don't realize that. What we tend to do is we take people in engineering, they come with an engineering degree, and then we teach them how to be better engineers. And then we teach them how to be advanced engineers and run a bit of a project. And then we make them a manager. But a manager is a completely different skill set. It's over here.
So their success is the curse.
So what they've done is they've shown they've been very good at it. And for some reason, we believe they'll be able to manage that just because they're good at it. And that's very rarely the case. There are some good managers around, as always. But often they're out of their depth, and B, they don't understand what their job is and they're unable to enforce it. And I can illustrate that if we've got time for me to do that. So I knew a person who was a good vibration engineer. He was really good. He's very bright. Vibration is a bit of a black art. Some of it's a bit of a black art. And you either understand it or you don't. So I could follow the rules of vibration and apply them and what have you. But these people have a deep gut understanding as to what's happening and how to apply these things. And he was very good at it. And they made him the head of department.
Okay.
And so I went to see him one day and asked him for some help. And he said, I can't help you now. I'm checking the timesheets. And I said, why are you checking the timesheets? And he said, because that's part of my job as the head of department, to approve the timesheets. And I said, but why is the man who's at the top of vibration checking timesheets? Why isn't a clerk doing that? And if because you're the head, the clerk sees some problems, he might come to you with one or two problems and say, these people are a problem, what shall I do about them? But that's all. You shouldn't be sat there using your whole morning checking people's timesheets. And I learnt that lesson very early on from an aircraft engineer who was very experienced, very bright chap, and he had a lot of responsibility. His job was to approve the components that went into flight. So basically on his say-so, something would fly, and of course the risk of catastrophe is very large. It carries a lot of responsibility with that. And I was in his office one day, and the manager came in and he said, I've got some urgent work that needs doing. When can you do it? And Bob looked at his sheet and he said, I've got someone coming free in 2 weeks. We'll do it then. And the manager said, no. He said, I can't wait for 2 weeks. He said, haven't you got anyone before that? And he had another look and he said, no. He said, 2 weeks is the earliest we can do it. And the manager said to him, he said, can't you do it? And the words he said, I'll never forget. He said, I'm not paid to work here. And I was sort of laughing, really. I thought it was a funny thing to say. I'm not paid to work here. And I realized the sense of what he was saying. His value to the business was that he was the man who made decisions that could potentially affect life and death on aircraft. And so the very best value he added to the company was to be making those decisions, not doing some work for a manager who was in a rush. And he had an understanding of what his value was to the business, whereas the manager who was in charge of the vibration department couldn't enforce it because when he became the manager, they gave him all this stupid work that was beneath his intelligence. And yet he had to do it because it was in his job description. And so I think it's really important to understand what your role is and how to do it and how to make that transition into line managers' roles.
So sorry, on that, sorry to cut you. There is this mindset. There are people who will do all this groundwork very quickly, very initially not efficiently, but then even later on efficiently because they've done it a few times. So like timesheets and all these basics
Admin tasks.
tasks, right? As you grow in your career, so these are parallel skills, right? So you do need to know how the overall administration works so that you can manage
You need the
effectively.
big picture.
And then effectively, if you're a good manager, all those things, administration things, will be in control. Right.
They would be in a good company.
Okay.
So the difference is that back in the old days, we would have technical clerks, people called technical clerks.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were writing a technical report, you would write out your text and you'd say, oh, I need a graph of the vibration characteristics here. And then you go on and you say, oh, I need a graph of something else over here. And you give that to the technical clerk and say, produce those 2 graphs to go in the documents, please. And you get on with your work.
Mm-hmm.
With the advent of computers and the ease of Excel and things like that, people say, well, you can now produce those graphs in Excel. So you've in effect become a technical clerk for part of your work.
Yeah.
So what it's done is reduce part of the demand for your intelligence in your own job by there. So this manager who was doing the timesheets could have easily said to a clerk, do the timesheets, but they no longer hire clerks. Because they think, well, you can do it. It's on the screen. You just go through and check it.
Yeah. But it's taking away your intellectual focus, which nobody values.
It's not using your job, your skills to their highest value in the company.
Yes. And I think once you reach to a certain level where the company and the people have recognized that you are that value add person who really is adding a lot of value.
Yeah.
So excellence, right? Only then they would give you this breathing space saying, okay, if you're saying no, I know it's below your pay grade, so I'll give it to somebody else. Or as a manager, I'll do it myself because we know you're so valuable.
Yeah.
But till you reach that point, you have to carry so much extra load, right?
Yeah.
And some people get bogged down with this. Actually, they lose the passion and energy.
Because that's not what they signed up for. That's why. So there's a difference between running a project and having the vision and the foresight and everything to know what should be in the place and what it should do, and having to do half of it. And often the managers aren't the best people to do this admin work anyway. Yeah. We used to have, in the old days when we had travel, we used to have departmental secretaries, and you could say to the departmental secretary, I'm going to Berlin next week. Could you fit me up with a hotel and a flight and what have you? And before you knew it, you would come back, all your documents, everything would be ready. And then they signed up with American Express to do all the travel. They put it online, and you find the managers sifting through, trying to work out how their own hotel and how it went together. But the departmental secretary could do it in minutes.
And actually, I can relate with that because that pain, and even to this day, this happens.
Yeah.
Right? Senior managers intending to travel for business are so busy in planning things here and there, wherever they're going.
Yeah.
And they are required to book flights themselves, hotels themselves. Yes, they are intended.
Nonsense.
Such a waste of time. I realize, personally, I've experienced it as well. Being a senior director at AstraZeneca, for example, we used to have all this support available.
Yeah.
But even then, just choosing those flights and tying it to the right kind of time zones and thinking, that will take me away from all my work.
But not only that, you might say make 4 trips a year like that. So you might have to plan that 4 times a year. Yeah. But a secretary who's doing it every day just does it as second nature.
Yes, exactly.
So not only is it taking away your time for where you're valuable, you're inefficient at it. So it's taking you twice as long as it should take.
Agreed.
And someone with a lower pay grade would take less time, less salary, and less money. So it's just a bonkers organization. But it's because computers have brought so many facilities onto our screen that we think we can do it all
ourselves. Yes.
And so why should we hire someone to do it?
And I think tied to that is working from home after post-COVID especially. Yes, the travel reduced.
Yeah.
But then I think the working hours for anybody I was spoken to, they've increased.
Yeah.
Working from home, we work more than what we worked in the office. And that is also tied with, oh, there's one more task, oh, there's one more booking, let me just finish it off and then I'll. Even right now, at home, because my office is next to the lounge, right, in the conservatory, it's always on. So I would come in to the lounge for the school pickup or run or whatever. There's flexibility is great. I can spend 5-10 minutes with my children. Then I go back in. Then there will be a meal. Okay, come out for the meal, go back in. Sometimes it's 9 p.m. So right from 7 a.m. or even 6 a.m. sometimes till 9 p.m. I'm there. And I have a standing desk that gives me this intrinsic feeling of, I'm doing some exercise, not just sitting down. So by the time it's around 7-8 p.m. I'm knackered. Like I've been standing all day and I'm mentally and physically tired. And it is much more work than I used to do when I used to go into the office. Sure. Because then I'll switch off, come back home after 4, so 8 to 4 or 9 to 5, whatever. It's very simple. 1 hour lunch break in the middle, and it used to be very straightforward. I think things have become much more complex.
I know people talk about being self-employed as a slight distraction, being your own boss and better and all the rest. But you're right, you work a lot harder as your own boss than you ever do otherwise, because everything relies on you and you have to do it. And Microsoft, I think, first hit the challenge. They were amongst the first people to get people to work from home. Long before COVID, they started trialing homework because they had the computer systems to do it. And they found, everyone said you're bonkers to do that because your staff will work less hard. And they found the challenge was to get them to switch off. So they were finding emails being answered at 10 o'clock at night. And they had to say to the staff, look, when you're at home, all right, be fair. So if you take half an hour off to go and pick up the children from school, by all means, work an extra half hour. But just because someone emails you at 10 o'clock at night, you do not have to reply to them. That's the next working day. So learn to switch off your machine when you're done and then leave it till the next day. And so that is really hard.
I think people are really struggling with that. I do, and many people I've spoken to, it's like, you cannot switch off. And especially in this connected age where you have this WhatsApp and social media and emails, and also there are 10 different mailboxes on your phone. Everything is on your phone, and you're on the screen all day and then on your phone, and you're switching between those two as well. It really takes a toll over time.
So in that sense, I think you have to learn the discipline. I'm pretty good at it, of turning it all off so that when I'm working, otherwise you get messages that pop up and say, oh, you've got mail, oh, you got this, you have WhatsApps here, bing, WhatsApp's arrived. If I'm doing something that's simple, I'll leave it on so I can respond to things. But if I want to focus on something, I'll turn it all off. And I learned that from, one of the jobs I did in my circle was to work on what's called the Joint European Taurus, which is at Abingdon in Oxfordshire. And that was the forerunner, I suppose, of the Hadron Collider, the search for fusion down in Abingdon. And it was a small-scale torus to try and build up fusion and test it. But we worked with the Atomic Weapons Authority, who were next door to us. And they had a system, because obviously what they do is quite crucial, that the email would come into an inbound server, and then the whole lot would go into a virus checker and the whole thing would be scanned. And when they were happy it was all clean, they would then put it into the workplace server and it would go to the participants. And then the participants would reply, it would go back into the holding server, which would again scan it all for viruses and put it out. Because of that, they only had incoming emails on the odd hours of the day, and they could only send outgoing on the even hours. Right? So if you missed an odd hour, they wouldn't get it for 2 hours. And because of that, no one expected them to reply, because they were told that if you miss the server timings, then it will be 2 hours before we get to see your email. But no one panicked about it. Nowadays, if you don't tell people that, they send you an email, and if you haven't replied in 5 minutes, they ring you up and say, why didn't you reply to my email?
Oh, what's the message? Did you get my email? Have you seen it? Why haven't you responded? Yeah, I can relate with that. So on that point, and we're going to focus towards your communication journey as well. So now relating your journey, your communication journey, and this is an amazing one, and that's where we got connected as well. And I really thank you for all the support and guidance and coaching and mentoring and training that you've done for me personally, and then for our company. And you've visited Pakistan multiple times.
For sure.
Toured. We were together in a couple of them as well. And lots of fun. The thing about distraction that we were talking about, let's just conclude on that. The point about very highly connected life these days, like people are hooked to their devices, that has a huge impact on our generation, current generation, because it was introduced in our lives in our presence. We used to live in the previous world, and now it has taken over our current world. But the next generation, they are born in this distracted world. Now they, I feel, have lost this ability to socialize. I was looking at some of the statistics. The biggest issue they have right now is eye contact.
For sure.
The next generation cannot have eye contact. The interviews are being failed because of that. And the employers are saying, what is this? What kind of generation is this? They can't communicate in the interviews. They can't have eye contact. They don't have the right body language. They are fidgety. They're uncomfortable in a face-to-face conversation. They're great in communication, writing and texting and chatting, but they're forgotten this skill of communication, heart-to-heart communication, or even public speaking. So let's continue that conversation now, and do keep this in mind. I want to hear your view of how this can be addressed.
For sure. I can deal with that now, or I can deal with it later on if you want. So I responded recently to a friend of mine, Simon Bucknell, who's also a great speaker and a great speaker coach. And he published something about the work that he does in schools with the School Trust and the Jack Petchey speaking competitions that run every year. And I was saying to him that this ought to be in part of the curriculum. If you put it into the curriculum, it's easy. And I've seen just what you've seen. I've seen a group of youngsters out at an event, and they're all sat round the table, but they're not talking. They're all on their individual phones. And I'm thinking, what is the point of coming out as a group to do that? And when I put into Simon's reply, I put in that this could be easily addressed if it was introduced into the curriculum. Somebody responded to me and said, absolutely right. All the surveys show that the big problem with youngsters going into the job market is communication. And they do fail. They can't hold eye contact. They just find it so difficult to have a conversation. And you need to build those skills. They're easy skills to build if you force people to do it. So yes, it is important and it can be addressed, but it takes a will. I heard the government, the current government, when they were looking for our vote, saying that they were going to introduce oracy into the school curriculum.
Oh, really? Okay.
But they made a lot of promises, most of which seem to have gone by the wayside. So whether that will actually occur, I don't know. But it needs to be there. And when I talk to young people at schools, the things that I stress are the importance of failure in your life and being resilient to failures, because I've seen children who are under, I guess, some kind of pressure to feel that they're good and doing a good job and being successful. And they're doing that at home, going to school, they're being successful, they're getting their A-level results, they go and do their driving test, they pass their driving test, they do this, and then they go off to university and find that they're very mediocre compared with the very bright people there. And suddenly, for the first time in their life, they're faced with being a failure and not being at the top and in the cream, and they find it difficult to cope. Their belief system collapses, whereas I'm not sure, it's one of the Norway, Denmark, one of those countries sends their children to school much later, or they don't teach them as much. They don't give them as homework, but what they do is they get them to play more in socially interactive.
Yes, the old Scandinavian model and the Finnish model.
Yeah, that's right. I can't remember which one it is.
Yes.
But but I know that they focus on human interaction. And
Yes.
in this technological world, I still think the thing that is true is people buy from people. So if you can't sell yourself as a person, you're dead in the water. Your technology won't get you out of that. And so it's important. But going back to my space career and where it all started. So once, I mean, I put in my introduction often that as an engineer, I suffered many dire presentations, and some of them were mine. And that's true when I started. When I started to become polished at delivering it, I realized I was surrounded by these bright people who couldn't communicate. And the challenge it was, both from their own personal ability, but also from the culture of the organization, which very much grounds them in a poor quality presentation skills and communication. And so I started to develop my interest around it. Because of my success in the competitions, I was organically picking up work in the outside world as a speaker coach. I started also to pick up that work organically. I mean, I was never paid as speaker coach within Airbus, but people used to come to me when they had presentations, and I would help them structure it and sort it out and all the rest. And I could just see the problems and the problems that needed solving. So when I finished Mars Rover, there was no big, lovely project, deep space project on the horizon for me to go to. So I decided it was time to jump ship and do this full time. And that was 7 years ago. I'd probably been doing it by then. Well, my first training session was actually in the year 2000. So I've been doing it almost 25 years now. But I just picked it up. I enjoyed the space industry. I loved it. I have to be honest, it was well paid. So the model of doing it part-time and outside worked for me. But I've also relished the challenge of doing it full-time. And I see lots of challenges. I see sometimes a reluctance to solve it properly. People don't want to solve it properly. They want people to go through training. I see in companies, they want them to go through presentation skills training or whatever it is. And it becomes a tick box exercise. Oh, we've done that. They've ticked the box. Go on. Let's have a one-day course, because one-day course suits HR because they can do it, tick the box, pay the money, and it's done. It suits the people because they only have to book one day off. It suits the trainer because they only turn up for one day. But what it isn't is effective, because my analogy is always learning a musical instrument. Do you play a musical instrument?
No, but I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Tell us more.
So if you were to play anything, say the guitar, say you wanted to learn to play a guitar, it's like me saying, well, I'm going to give you a superb guitarist for a day, and they will tell you everything they know, and then it's up to you. And that's a nonsense. And we all know it's a nonsense, because when we come to train people to learn musical instruments, they go to a coach or a teacher, and the teacher may not be the best guitarist in the world, but they're good enough to teach a beginner how to get good basics and fundamentals. So they teach them for so long, then the player gets too good for them, then they look for a better quality coach, and they go to a better quality coach, and now they're a good player, so they learn very differently. And if they're very lucky and they work very hard, they get to the top, and then they get a superb guitarist who teaches them, but then they're capable of understanding what they're teaching them. But down here at this level, they're not capable of understanding it and taking it on board and evolving it into an implementation plan. And we've always talked about this within our work, that the key phase is the implementation. It's not the teaching and the knowledge, it's the implementation. And that's the same with public speaking, that it's about the implementation and showing people how to develop things in a way that they will implement into the organization and produce things.
Interestingly, I can also relate with that. Even though I like, so unlike you, where you detested public speaking. Right? I used to like speaking in front of people and make cracking jokes, and I was known to be this kind of, that one person who just brings the party alive kind of thing. in smaller settings generally, not big stage.
Yes.
So they found me funny, and when I could see the laughs, that could give me energy, and I would do more. And
And humor is like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wasn't shy with that. I would actually, if you asked me to stand in front, I would, but I had no structure in mind. I had no prepared speech. I had nothing. It was more of every time it was being extempore kind of thing, and there was no need to have a deliberate practice in there or structure to it, right? Um, I moved here, migrated to England, and because of my interest in this speaking side and speeches, even though some of them might be uh, prepared speeches, but I would still wing them. I would just stand up, say, yeah, whatever comes to mind, and I would just make it interesting enough. Sometimes it would make sense. Most of the time it won't, but it doesn't matter. For me, it didn't matter. So when we moved here, I was in a new culture, new society. Everything was new here, right? New country, new city, new company, new colleagues, new friends. So I had to redefine myself. And as you moved in, I joined Xerox.
Yeah.
Right? And at Xerox, they took me through that training program as well as part of the induction. I was a software engineer and senior software engineer and related roles. So it was quite geeky, my work.
Yeah.
But because of my other interests, I would say, yeah, I need something more. Like you, I needed a challenge. I needed to solve newer problems rather than same old problems. So when I went through that training, I was like, wow, that's great. But again, I felt like this was a sheep drip experience.
Yeah.
I could see there were some great skills shared by that expert trainer. But within a week or so, I had no clue what he said. I never used any of those techniques, and I forgot everything.
Yeah.
And 6 months down the line, we had another training program, which had another kind of aspect of this. Went through it. Again, same result. I realized that unless there is a structured repetition or incremental iterative approach to this, which you are calling the implementation phase, I feel that it's impossible.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's not impossible, but you give yourself a hard task. You've got to be very good at implementing. So, for instance, any course that I do, if someone says, I want you to do a one-day course online, in my head, I think 3 days. I think I'm going to spend 1 day listening to it. I'm going to spend 1 day going through all the notes I've taken and producing an action plan. And I'm going to spend 1 day going through putting that action plan into my diary so I know what to implement. So if you're telling me that you want me to go for a 1-day course, in my head, I'm thinking I have to allow 3 days in order to be able to implement what I learn.
That's an amazing recommendation.
And also, if I can pick it up while we're in this point, this business of hard work, we're not machines with electronics module. So you cannot turn up to a presentation skills training and have the speaker fit a new public speaking module and go out the door as a public speaker. It's just a nonsense. And often the people who come on the courses just are not prepared to do the hard work that's necessary. Whilst we talk and we say, oh yes, we've done this and we've done that and we've been through this, there is an immense amount of hard work. And I see people even in the Toastmasters scene, when I say to them, but when I was giving speeches, when I was a newbie in Toastmasters and I was giving speeches, I would have to have my speech finished a week before the meeting so that I could spend the next week practicing it so that on the night it was good. And I see people pitch up and say, well, I wrote this afternoon. And their evaluators will say, oh yes, that's a good job and you can do this and that. They're not really learning. Now, I don't want to decry that because there are times when we do have to write a speech this afternoon and deliver it in the evening, and you need that skill. But if you do that all the time, you never learn how good you can be. And you're working far beneath your peak threshold. And you have to learn how to do that. And you have to face the struggles that are in there, the failures that you get, what I call failures that you get. And you have to sit down and think, so why did I not win? Why wasn't that good enough? What have I got to do to make it good enough? Then you've got to find your own route to achieve that level, and then you've got to put in the hard work to practice. So nothing, it doesn't matter what you do in terms of skills and giving it to people, you cannot underestimate the effect that hard work and determination has on your own success.
I can fully resonate with that. So when I came across Toastmasters, the club that you started,
Yeah.
my first time I came in as a guest, and I saw listened to the speeches, looked at the body language. I had some interest in body language. My dad taught me a few things, um, but then the kind of feedback that was given, so on so many different aspects that were completely oblivious to me. So the timing, the constructive feedback, so the positive switch, commendation, recommendation, and commendation. Then many people would give you those, and then there'll be voting, and then this is a kind of a well-rounded
Yeah.
recommendations, right? And then you see other people's speeches being dissected, kind of thing, right? And later on in the breaks, I would talk to the people who would be winning or who had just won. And I was like, wow, so you did so well. What did you do? And this was a common pattern. Oh, I've been practicing for this for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And I wrote it down and I practiced it a few times, recorded myself. And I was like, that's a lot of hard work. Like,
Yeah. It's a lot of
and personally, I thought, like, I can't do this, right? Because I wing so well.
Yeah.
There's no point in just investing that much time. And later on, when my journey started, those 10 speeches, I realized first few were horrible.
Yeah.
Like, the feedback was okay.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel good myself.
No.
And I remember you giving me some tips. You were very patient with me, and you still are. Thank you very much for this. But I was like, I can't write it down. Like, if I write it down, I lose my creativity. That's like my negative excuses I've given myself. And then over time, I realized, I think there's the ninth or probably ninth speech. I finally wrote it down.
Yeah.
Till that point, I did write it down, but never practiced it.
No.
So ninth one I practiced, I still didn't win. Even that small thing. It's not a competition. It's just the fortnightly thing. But the final one, the 10th one, I prepared, I practiced, and I felt like, okay, I can be natural, still be natural, or even though it's written, it's practiced, rehearsed, everything else.
Yeah.
But it's still natural because I've practiced enough to add my emotion to it.
Yeah.
And that made the difference. And then I remember the feedback I got was, okay, so I did win. Finally, this was a 10th speech. Imagine the manual, it took about a year.
Yeah.
And the feedback was that we could see your true passion coming out.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, how did that happen? Like,
Yeah.
but still, with all that structure, there is passion and there's the emotion can be experienced like that. And I was seeing these amazing speeches around, and then I went into this competition as well. If you pushed me to say, just go into the competition. And there I realized the power of practice. Because I would be practicing with my young son, who will be roaming around. He's just 2-3 years old. And I'll just sit down here, I'll put my recorder up, and say, tuck, 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 with the 7-minute speech, right?
Yeah.
And I would just do it and say, okay. And then he would go, nice. There's no clue what I'm talking about. And I would seriously present.
Yeah.
I did it about 20-30 times. Right?
Yeah.
And it was like becoming kind of boring because it was so much repetition.
Yeah.
But then I was feeling better about it because I was like, yes, now it's in me. I can actually bring that true emotion, the true story, the true relationship with the audience.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
that. And I did win, which was amazing. I couldn't believe it. Seriously.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that I could win a competition like that. And that gave me a lot of confidence. But then came my role as a senior director in AstraZeneca. I was asked to deliver a keynote speech at... Actually, I'll step back a bit. I need to tell these two things because this relates directly with how you have added value to my journey.
Yeah.
When I was going through this Toastmasters thing, after the 10th speech and the competition, that gave me so much confidence that what I was doing at work started making more sense to me.
Yeah.
I could actually communicate that better because of my coaching and training programs that I was running, especially the transformation that I was doing at eBay at that time in London. So it was going so well that the MD, even at the interview, the first day, he called his senior leadership, sat me down and said, okay, tell me what you're going to do. And I was so confident. I just said a few words, as you mentioned, that's just one of those core words. And he said, okay, you want to come from tomorrow. That was it.
Yeah.
The day I joined, this is a new company, 200 people, big transformation going on. And he says, we have all hands and Naveed is going to speak. And I was like, I'm in this new company. I just joined. I don't have a clue what this company does. And you want me to speak in front of those 200 people who are part of the transformation, who I'm going to coach and consult with.
Yeah.
So I can't mess it up, right?
No.
But he tells me 5 minutes before, like we are walking to the hall and you say, you're going to speak. And I was like, and then I thanked your help, because in my mind, I said, okay, what are the 2 or 3 things that I'm going to say? If it's one, what is that one thing?
Yeah.
And I focused on this concept of Muda and lean. I was like, okay, we're going to reduce the waste. And I used this word Muda, and it became a kind of a joke. And people could relate with it, and they broke down they broke the ice with me in that speech. And later on, in a keynote speech in AstraZeneca, when I was interviewed first, all the candidates were amazing. And I got the job after a big panel presentation. This was a 10-minute presentation. I prepared so much, and I gave the eBay case study as a prepared speech. I recorded myself in the interview as well.
Yeah.
And they were like, what are you doing? I was like, I need to record myself, because I always do. And I presented and I got the job. And later on, I asked the interviewers, like they gave my colleagues, I was like, what was the thing that really differentiated with it? Your speech was amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they asked me to present as a keynote speech at their quarterly planning sessions and all those. And I asked you every time for those help. So all the speeches I've done, the major ones, especially, you helped me go from this chaotic speaker to a keynote speaker.
Yeah.
And that too from the smaller stage to the global stages, where there's hundreds of top leaders from Europe and others were inspired by the purpose powered profitability. And you used to call it purpose powered performance. And you even helped me name that as well.
Yeah.
So that journey has taken me to places. And the thing that you mentioned earlier about somebody telling you, if you cannot speak well, you can never reach that top level, right? I have experienced it myself. My journey and my career just accelerated after all of this.
Yeah.
Without this, I was a good engineer.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
And things happened.
Yeah.
So your passion and energy has given you this skill.
Yeah.
And
hard work.
It has lots of hard work, right?
Yeah.
And you joined 2 clubs. I couldn't manage my one club because it was even just fortnightly.
Yeah.
With the full-time job, that was a lot.
Yeah.
Because I had to prepare as well. And you were part of 2 roles. That means you really found your true passion in there.
Yeah, I think it developed, but I can't understate this discipline of hard work. If you want good results, you've got to put in the discipline. And you talked about practice. So I had an interesting time recently, and you mentioned at the top of the show that I was a TEDx speaker.
Yeah.
I did that in Ireland recently. I did a TEDx speech in Ireland, which lasts just over 13 minutes. And I did 2 presentations in Norway, one of which was 2 hours and one of which was 3 hours.
Oh.
For the TEDx speech, you're on video, you're being filmed. There are no retakes. You don't go back and say, oh, sorry, I made a mistake there, I'll go back. You go from the beginning and you go to the end, and they film it, and how it comes out is how it comes out. So it has to be perfect. In a speech like that, which we need in life, from time to time, you need to put in the practice. So my habit has always been, and I built up this habit from the competitions. It's why I was so successful in the competitions. I didn't think I was particularly uniquely talented. I didn't think anyone in the competition would outwork me. And so I had a habit of practicing my speech after breakfast, after lunch, and after dinner every day, and generally in the last month before the contest, which would mean 3 times a day, 31 days in the month. So probably in total around 100 times in there. And you talked about feeling at ease and relating to the audience. So what happens when you start practicing is you start to take the words on board, but you're still focused on the words, on what you're saying. But it's like a hump. in the road. When you get to the hump, and I don't know quite where it comes, but I can tell you 100 is well over the hump. When you get over the hump, you no longer have to think about the words because they come out automatically.
Yes.
And when you when you can stop thinking about the words, then you're thinking about your connection with the audience. So when I was giving my TED speech, which I did exactly the same, someone asked me how often I rehearse, and I said this to them, and I said it'd be about 100 times. And when you do it like that, it means I was stood there not thinking about the words because I knew the words would come. They would just, I could see the structure in my head and I could just talk to it. And then I could interact with the audience. When there was funny bits, I could look at them, and expect a response from them and all the rest of it. So all the bits that make your talk really great come because the information is now ingrained. It's a part of you. And you can start off, I could probably start off right now and just do it straight off the top of my head because it would just come out naturally. That took almost that month to rehearse that for that 13 minutes. The 2 hours and the 3 hours, hardly any preparation. I needed to sit down and think, what do I want to get? What's the structure? What are the stories? That's it. And this is a truism of life, that if you're giving a workshop that's like a conversation and you can interact with the people, you don't need to know what to say word to word. So you don't need to practice it. You'll find as you get experience, you build blocks of knowledge.
Yes.
And when someone says a question, how do you rehearse? I can just go into how I rehearse. It doesn't always come out the same, but it will have all the relevant information in. So there are speeches or workshops or long events where you don't need to prepare word perfectly. And there are ones where you do need to prepare, and you need to understand the difference and where to put in your work to make both of them work. So I think that's really important. But if it's important in your career or your life, like your keynote or what have you, you need to do the rehearsal. You need to put in that time and effort. And you're right, it can be painful. I no longer have children, although my grandchildren I still do have children. Sorry, I mean, I don't have them living with me. I haven't disavowed them. But when I was preparing for this, the grandchildren weren't staying there. The only thing we had my son's dog, and I started practicing the speech and she got up and walked out the room. But everyone's a critic now. So, but you just have to get into that routine, do it in different places in the house. So you're not always practicing in the same place. You can pick it up. I think I've told you in the past how sad I am that when I've got it how I want it, I record it and then I put it in my car. So when I'm driving around, it's playing in the background. I'm not listening to the radio because you memorize things differently when you hear them. And so you're using lots of different senses in your rehearsal. But if you want to be word perfect on the day, mine was absolutely flawless. I've seen the recording.
I've seen it as well. It's amazing, actually. I highly recommend it. It's beautiful.
It's absolutely flawless. It's exactly what I wanted, exactly what I rehearsed, and it just came out and there was no pressure. I felt under no pressure. I knew my time was well within. I could interact with the audience. I had the time to do that. And it all just worked, but it only worked because I'd put in that level of preparation. And even my poor darling wife, who has a lot to put up with over the years with me competing, but when we went down for breakfast, she would have to sit and have an extra cup of tea while I went up to the bedroom so I could do my first practice after breakfast. And then, so we fit them in during the day so that even when we were in the hotel building up to it, doing it 3 times a day. And one of the reasons I do this is that I've had failures in my life like everyone has, and you live with the failures. We always say we never fail, we learn or we succeed. The only 2 states. But I've done a lot of learning in my life. But when it comes to speaking and speaking to an audience, I can always tolerate something not working if I know I've done my absolute maximum. I've rehearsed right up to the day I've delivered. I've delivered and it hasn't gone quite as I've wanted, and that's just life. Those things happen. What I cannot tolerate is that I stop rehearsing early and I deliver it and it isn't right. And I think if I'd have carried on rehearsing right up, that would have been right. So if you fail and you've given it your maximum effort and you've achieved it, then that's just part of life's roller coaster. But if you failed and you haven't put in the effort and you've stopped early, that's your failure. That's nothing to do with life. That's because you haven't given it maximum effort. And I personally cannot tolerate that. So that's why even though I could probably get away with it, I rehearse right up until the last minute and it's clear in my head, and then I do it and I think, yeah, I like that result. It was worth doing properly.
Great advice. I think these are your golden advice and pearls of wisdom that you just shared.
Yeah.
Because I've been guilty of that. I still do sometimes, where I could have put in more effort,
Yeah.
and because I did enough to go by,
Yeah.
I get distracted or get other junk as well. There are so many. I can use those as excuses, but if I wanted to, if I really would feel that this mindset of I need to give it my best shot.
Yeah.
And if it still doesn't go well, that's okay.
Yeah.
But the other way is not acceptable.
No.
That I'm still working on it.
Yeah. And I learned that from competitions. It came from competitions. You know, I always said that if I compete on the day and I come second, I know that that was my best, and fair play to the person who beat me. But if I came second and the thought would be in my head that if I'd tried a bit harder, I could have won that. That would annoy me.
No, yes.
So
That's great points.
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple of points that you mentioned about your patience of your wife.
Yeah.
I feel that we all majority of us face that. So 2 points on that. First, you talked about you driving in and listening to your own speech.
Yeah.
Whenever I try that, I get so much ridicule from my family. It's like, here he goes again. Yeah, can you please turn it off? Okay, so I'm trying to learn and revise and listen to myself saying, what can I improve? And here we are, people complaining. So I have to stop it, right?
Yeah.
And only when I'm driving alone or doing something else, then I can do this. I have a lot of support from my wife and from my children, and they find me becoming happier when good things happen, right? And when I manage to put in an inspirational message and it really works, they can see me chirpy, right? I become happier, and thanks to them and their patience that it has happened. But how can you enable that in people who actually are very afraid of listening to their own voice? I've heard this multiple times. I ask them to record themselves and listen to this. Right? Like, it's so awkward to listen to my own voice.
Yeah, it is.
How do you help them get over this?
I'll tell them to get over it. I'm sorry to be blunt on this point, but the reason our voice sounds so different when we hear it on a recording is because we're used to hearing it back through our head, which just happens naturally. But what the recording hears is what the audience hear. So they have to put up with it. So you have to put up with it. And there is no short way around it. I listen to myself all the time because I record everything I do, and then I listen back to it and see whether I liked it, whether I think there's things to improve. And I've just got used to listening to it. And over time, you get used to it and you realize that this is your voice. This is how people hear you. So it's no good saying I don't like to listen to it because it doesn't sound like me. It does sound like you, just not the way you hear it. And the only way to deal with it is just to get over it and just deal with it. Just listen to yourself. There's no shortcut or magic bullet or anything that makes you feel better. It's a reality of life, so you just need to deal with it.
Okay, great. And then coming to the last point on this spouse, unless you have support from your spouse, I feel that it's going to be a huge uphill journey, because we are working full time. We are preparing for our speeches, we're going to the competitions, we are practicing in our spare time. And then here is the one person who's really struggling to find our time. So unless they support and they appreciate, or they at least are willing to listen to us. Because even in the small talk, even if we are having a meal together or coffee together or walk on for a walk, in our minds, it will be, at least in my mind, it will be, oh, I'm preparing for the speech and this is what I did, this is the story. And I would inevitably, after some small talk, come back to the point.
Yeah.
With whoever I am. So it's their patience.
Yeah.
What are your tips of how to encourage the spouse, the other half to?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to give tips on that. I've been very fortunate that my lovely wife is incredibly supportive, and she always has been, of what I've done. Even before I was a speaker, when I drove around, I always used to, it was in those days, it was cassette players. I used to listen to motivational cassettes of speakers.
Okay.
So Dennis Waitley and Zig Ziglar and all the big names, Tony Robbins, I used to have them in my car. And of course, because I drove backwards and forwards to work and I was doing a lot of mileage in the car,
Okay.
so I listened to them a lot. But I'd just stop the engine and it would stop where it stopped. And when I started the engine, it would start. And then I'd go out with my family and the tapes would start and they go, oh, not the Dr. Dougal tape, stop the war. But I think if they understand the importance, if you say, I'm preparing for something big, I'm sorry, this is just running in the background, they just live with it, they put up with it, they tolerate it, and you're not actively listening, it goes in passively, which is why it's so powerful. But good supportive partners have to have very specific qualities. Sally has learned many years ago that as a supportive partner, there are times when I need her close, when I need her support and encouragement, and that's really powerful. And there are times when I need her far away because I need to get my game head on and get in my own space before a competition. And I think just our relationship, she has learnt those two different states and she does it brilliantly. So she knows when I want a bit of space and quiet and to do what I have to do, whether it's rehearsal or get ready for a competition or a speech, and what I'm likely to be like before it, and what I need a bit of quiet time to get my thoughts together, or whether I need the encouragement and to chat about what's happening. And some people will have supportive partners and some won't, I guess, is the reality of life. I think that's true. I didn't train her or encourage her or show her any way. She's very good with women, with people.
Yeah.
She's a lot better than I am. I can tell you, we went to Norway and we were on a flight, and normally what I do is I book 2 aisle seats next to one another.
Okay.
So we both sit on the aisle,
Yes.
and we can talk to one another, but we're on the ends of the rows, which just suits us nicely. So we've flown from Dublin to Oslo, and I've talked to no one apart from the stewardess to ask for a coffee and what have you. She's made a lifelong friend with the woman next to her. She now got a life history and her email address, and they're communicating.
Oh.
And she's very good at that. So she's very good at reading people and understanding what's needed. And she was a teacher all her life, all her working life, and she just has that natural ability, what we would call interpersonal skills. Mine is more intrapersonal. Mine goes inside. I'm very sure of my own beliefs, my own core inside, but she's very good outside, and that has rubbed off into a support for me.
Great. So we are into the final segment, which is rapid fire. We're going to talk about you as a person, how you manage yourself as a whole.
Yeah.
Right? So that means the 4 segments we talk about are the soul set, how you manage your spirituality or anything you do for the soul. The second one is the mindset, which is how you learning how to learn, and any techniques and tips that you have for that. Then there is heart set, which is to do with emotions, how you manage your emotions, your anger, your frustrations, your anything to do with people or yourself, right? And the fourth one is health set, how you manage your health. It could be your dietary thing or could be a physical exercise thing, or anything to do with a well-rounded a person with good health.
Okay.
Overall. Okay, so starting with soul set.
Yeah.
What are your 3 tips on nurturing your soul set?
I think you have to have a faith I went to Pakistan, as you know, recently, and actually, as we went round a mosque, the question cropped up. Someone asked me if I was a religious person, and I'm not desperately religious, but I have a faith in a higher level being. And we were in a country that obviously is very religious, people following Islam in a very strict sense, with all the routines that you have for your prayers and what have you. I don't observe those, but I do think it's important to have a deep faith because it gives us something abstract to hold on to when all else seems to be failing. And there are times when everyone needs that in their life. And so I think that's important. I think you've got to have a faith. I think also you've got to be able to put work into context. We see problems and we think they are huge in our life, but I've come to realize that very little is as huge as we make it out to be. And I think you have to have that ability. Well, I suppose we've been lucky in one sense. Perhaps my wife has been unlucky in another sense, but she's had 3 bouts of cancer. She's survived them all, and she's doing absolutely great. I'm sure she'll outlive me. But when you see that sort of situation, you realize the things that you get wound up about when money is tight or when you're having a hard time are really not that hard compared with some of the things you see. So I think the ability to see that for what it really is and not let it overly worry you is important. And I think you've also got to set, the third tip would be then to set time aside for your mental peace. That even though we like to think we're busy 24/7, let's go, let's get things done, the body needs time to relax, or the mind needs time to relax. I'm not terribly good at meditation. I do try, but I'm not terribly good at it. But we need to take the effort to let our mind relax so that it's fully charged to do the things that we want it to do.
On that point, because this is the mental health month,
Yep.
any message that you want to give to people who might be suffering from mental health? The statistic I can share with you, because that will bring things to context. 1 in 8 men, according to WHO, suffer from mental health and mental health issues. And out of those, only 40% of men reach out for professional help. And out of those 40, especially for Muslim men, only 2.6% complete the overall treatment. So there's a very exception kind of route that people take, where they're actually completing their treatment. Others are either not reaching out or they're not completing the journey. And hence the mental health is increasing. And it's a major problem in the community right now, globally. So what would be your tip or take on that?
So I have a very personal interest. My sister-in-law committed suicide from mental problems. And it was tragic. What's tragic about mental health is that what you want people to do is exactly what you talked about. You want people to reach out and get help, and let those people that offer help guide you through the process to help you recover. But actually, when you're mentally ill, what you want to do is close down and go inside yourself. So you don't want to realize. I think the first stage has to be, you have to talk to people who can give you that support, people who are close to you, not health officials, not health benefits, because my sister-in-law had the benefit of doctors and health officials, but because she wanted to close down, she told those people what she felt they needed to hear rather than be honest with it. So I think you need somebody who's in your corner, who's honest enough to pick up and give you some gentle cajoling through these issues.
So that means we need to start with the acquaintances or family or friends or trusted
Absolutely.
people around you.
Family, I would say, is the first place to start. And if the people listening are a family member, if someone talks to you about the mental health issues, you've got to take it seriously. Because it's very easy to think, oh, they're going through a bad phase, but they'll pull out of it. But not everyone does, sadly. And so you need to take it seriously and work together to support them at a time when they don't really want support, and that can be the awkward part.
Yeah. I appreciate that, because there are people who will be suffering from this and they don't know what the way out is.
No.
And they are closing down, as you say,
Yeah.
and we might not pick it up.
Yeah.
They might even be in contact with the medical support, but what they need is somebody trusted who would actually appreciate that there is something wrong. Then they engage the right people and get the guidance and bring them out of that shell.
Yeah.
Because unless you communicate, there is a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
And men especially, because of the taboo topic, probably, they don't really open up.
No.
They are 3 times less likely than women to actually reach out for such help.
So it's not a men's build at the moment. Hopefully over generations we will change that. But men were never taught to be vulnerable. When women have a problem, they talk about it with other women often. And that gives them an outlet. And women are quite happy, it seems, to talk about a problem without needing a solution. It's just that getting it off their chest, to talking about it. Whereas men tend not to do that. They tend to brush it off and think, no, I'll find my own way out of it. So you're right, it is different for men, but whoever's suffering mental illness, it's hard and they need support and they need help. But not just from the medical profession in these odd interventions when they go once a week to see a psychiatrist or a therapist or something. They need it every day. They need help every day.
Really? Okay. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So that covers our first point, which is the soul set.
Yeah.
Let's go into the mindset.
Yeah.
This is where, how do you nurture your mind, learning how to learn, techniques, tips, and anything that will help others improve their mindset?
Yeah. I think you need to take on the mindset of a champion. I think whatever you do, you want to be a champion. I don't think it matters whether that's gardening or whether it's work-based skills or whether it's public speaking skills, whatever it is, because champions always have different mindsets. So people who are doing things because they have to are persuaded, and that's a very short-term motivation. But people who are doing things that become champions are inspired, and that's a very long-term motivation. And the difference is that with that mindset, it lights your own motivation. You don't need external motivation to do things. And I think that's the important stage. You need to want to be something different.
Yep.
And that's the sort of language you should hear.
Great.
And with that comes other things in your mindset. It starts to become a discipline. Disciplines become habits, and I'll tell you more about habits when we get to the health stage. But disciplines become habits, and before you know it, you're doing the things that you need to do to be good naturally and habitually. And that's what I think you're looking for. So the mindset of a champion covers that, but underneath that, you want motivation, you want discipline, and you want strong habits.
Motivation, discipline, and habits. Okay, wonderful. Great. Does that cover your mindset part?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Let's go to the heart set. So this is where you manage your emotions.
Yeah.
Anger, frustration, anything to do with the human interaction, personally, with yourself or others. How do you manage that heart set?
Better now than I did when I was younger.
Okay.
And I think that's often quite common. You know, young men are fired up and so they tend to be less patient and more annoyed and that. And I was like that as a young man. You know, things would annoy me more. As I've got older, I've learned that the things don't have the impact. So one technique I used a lot, I probably use it less so now because I seem to be in a more even keel. But when things went wrong, I got in a habit. I don't know where I learnt it, probably off one of those Dr. Dougal tapes. But I got in the habit of saying, that's lucky. And then I would look for a reason why it was lucky. And you can find that there's always an upside to every downside. And that so when things go wrong, you just say, well, it's gone wrong. I can't do anything about it. I find I do that more than ever. So that would be my second tip, that when something's gone wrong, it's gone wrong. And there's no rewind in life. You can't go back and reset it. It's gone wrong. You have to deal with where you are, not where you'd like to be.
So accept failure and move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Number 3.
And
And
I think, I think you have to put things in context. I think we take
Mhm.
things terribly out of context,
Mhm.
you know. And in a competitive world, sometimes that out of context means we give meaning to other people's actions that they never have. So, for instance, the person who cuts in at the front line of a queue, this is another thing I do now. My wife will make you laugh again in a minute. But if you're in a traffic queue waiting patiently and someone drives straight to the front and cuts in, it's easy to be annoyed because everyone's being patient except them. And so you apply a level of intent to their actions that they perhaps never had. And so my trick for always that was when that used to happen in a traffic queue, instead of getting annoyed, I used to say, that's probably somebody on their way to see their mother who's ill in hospital and needs to get there quickly. Now, as soon as you say that, it changes your view of them cutting in because you can understand their urgency. It may or may not be true. However,
Positive story.
the context sets your own peace of mind. And now if my wife ever hears me getting annoyed with anyone, she says, you never know, they could be rushing on their way to hospital. So I can't get away with anything in the car now.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. That's great. I think the final one is on health set.
Yeah. So health is really important. As you get older, the key phrase is not health or fitness, it's longevity. Your health, you realize that the end of your life is closer than you'd like it to be, and that what you really want is longevity. What we all hope for, I think, is compressed mortality. In other words, you live well until you don't, and then that's the end of it. And so I exercise every day, every work day. I work 5 days a week. I work out. And
What type of workout?
so I generally do strength conditioning. So I have free weights, do press ups, things like that. I have TRX ropes, so I can do rows and things like that. I have a small area in the garage, and I do them every day. It's just easy.
How long?
I do 30 minutes a day.
30 minutes.
Yeah, and that's with pretty high heart rate in there. So it's high intensity exercise. Generally, I try twice a week to get into the gym to use the cross trainer, because I use a technique called Norwegian 4x4s, which is where you work flat out for 4 minutes and then you get 3 minutes to recover, and you do 4 cycles like that. And it's a really high cardio pump to pump your VO2 maximum. But all of those, both the strength is good for elderly people because it improves your balance and your ability to work. And the VO2 max is important for your longevity. But it's become a habit for me, and ever since I started, and that was probably, I always exercised, but I probably took it seriously from about 1989. So about 35 years I've been doing that as a daily habit in there. I don't get up in the morning, and that's why I said I'll tell you more about habits here. When you have this discipline and it becomes a habit, I never get up in the morning and think to myself, oh, do I feel like exercising? Shall I go and exercise? I get up in the morning, and then depending on what time I've decided to do my exercise, I get changed and go and do my exercise. And that it's never a decision to me, it's a habit. You just do it. And because it's a habit, I find it easy. I know not everyone does that. I try to do more long walks, and while we've got my son's dog, I take advantage of that to get out and walk every day, because that also flips into your mental health.
Yes.
The walk in a countryside is brilliant for your mental health. But build those habits, and there's lots you can do without joining a gym. I use a gym because I can't get the big equipment and I have particular exercises I want to do, but there's lots you can do in your house with some very cheap free weights just to build your strength. You can do lots of body weight exercises that are excellent for you. You can do plenty of walking. You don't have to run. So there is absolutely no excuse for not keeping yourself healthy, because you can do it all without spending a penny in your house, in the comfort of your own home.
Great, excellent. So, so one quote that I remembered from your mindset about the discipline and habits, it goes like, be careful of your thoughts, they become your words. Be careful of your words, they become actions. Be careful of your actions, they become habits.
Yeah.
And be careful of the habits, they become your destiny, I think.
Yeah,
they become
good
your
day.
destiny.
Yeah, they do.
And that, oh, sorry, character. Yeah, habit, they builds the character. So be careful of your habits, they become the character.
Yeah.
And be very, very careful of your character, because that defines your destiny.
Yeah.
And it all starts with that thought.
Yeah.
So unless we manage the mindset with the right heart set,
Yeah.
and our body, physical being, our health set enables it to function like that, it's very difficult to stay healthy and fit for longer and
Yeah.
be champion at anything.
Yeah.
Because a champion's mind requires a body to support it as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we need to take care of all of those. So that's great. I think the other thing you mentioned about the mental health, there's one mistake that people make, and there again, Einstein's quote comes to mind, which is definition of insanity.
Yeah.
Doing the same things over and over again and
Yeah.
expecting different results.
Yeah.
People try to do the same things over and over again without really realizing that it's an iterative and incremental approach that they need. There needs to be a deliberate practice rather than just a practice that they're doing without really understanding how it's contributing to the big picture.
Yeah, for sure.
So great to hear all of those holistic kind of your approach to soul set, mindset, heart set, and health set. Any final tips you want to give in this segment?
No, I think the only thing I would say is be a pioneer. You picked on Einstein's quote, which I think is very true, doing the same thing over and over. I get that in presentation skills. People just do the same thing they've always done. In life, you want to be a bit of a pioneer. None of us has the magic bullet to know what is best to do. So whatever it is, whether it's your presentation skills, your health, or whatever you want to change, don't just do what you've always done. Try something different and see what the results is. You might get it wrong. It doesn't matter. Try it, get it wrong. And if it's wrong, you think, well, now I know one way it doesn't work, and then try another way. But don't just accept what you've always done. Just pick on something different. Think, what could I do that might just improve it? Give it a try. If it improves it, keep it. If it doesn't, ditch it and try something else.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you very much, Bob. This was a wonderful session. I've got my loads and loads of notes I need to review later on. And the great technique that I picked up from you was for a one-day training, you consider it as 3 days.
Yeah.
So if I translate that into an hour, a 1 hour session would mean 3 hours. Right?
Yeah.
So you need to review all of the notes, all the things that you've learned.
Exactly.
And then you decide on what you are going to implement in a discipline. That means another day to plan everything into your upcoming calendar, upcoming days, to make sure that you benefit from it and practice it on a regular basis so that it becomes your second nature.
Yeah. Often the most expensive books we sell are the notes from a training course, because they go onto the bookshelf and never get looked at again.
Yes. Yes, been there, done that.
Yeah.
Indeed, we all. Wonderful. That's great. Thank you very much, Bob.
That's a pleasure, Naveed. Great to see you again.